Hello and welcome to this conversation, very important conversation on sex education. Is it taboo? You've just heard all about Lawyers Club of India and No Rape India. I welcome my participants. If they could just unmute themselves. Harjeet Singh Jaspal, you've just heard about him. Good to have you here. Kavita Anand, may we have you as well?
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Srijani. We expect to hear a lot from you, Srijani. Good to have
Hi,
you here.
everyone.
And Dr. Prabhat Pankaj.
Hi.
Welcome all. And as we saw, this topic is something that is something that everyone has a point of view on. But I'd like to begin with someone who has the most experience possibly dealing with all the stakeholders involved, whether it's parents, children, or the school system itself. Kavita. Kavita, tell me, how tough is it to actually uh, talk about sex in schools?
It's really difficult. We have parents who are sometimes terrified if they even hear the word sex education
Right.
in schools. I think the teachers themselves are not terribly comfortable, so that becomes an issue. And of course, students take it in all kinds of ways. So from welcoming it to sniggering about it, there's a gamut of responses. So it's really difficult to talk about it. I think it's really something to look forward, but not easy.
Right. Is there a curriculum that actually enables it to be easy, or does the curriculum make it more difficult?
I think there's been attempts to make a curriculum that's been there by the NCERT, and I think that has happened sporadically, but there is no policy that sort of says that this is what has to be conducted in this particular manner in schools. So
Right.
the way in which a curriculum is lovely. It's like a policy. The
Right.
policy is actually implemented, the way a curriculum is implemented is what makes the difference. So I think curriculum is fine. There's a expectation that schools will have counselors, and biology teachers are expected to deliver this particular aspect of the curriculum overall. But I think it's not like I said, it's not about the curriculum.
Right.
And schools have been known to add or subtract from it, sometimes ignore it completely, sometimes bring up a lot more, especially because it's not easy to keep up. Curriculum is static, and you have a lot of new things that come up.
Yes.
So, I don't think that the latest laws kind of show up in the curriculum.
Right. We'll talk a little about the laws with Harjeet, who's with us. But right now, I'd like to go to Srijani because she's, in a sense, at the receiving end. She represents the receiving end of the dialogue here. Srijani, what is it like to be in a class, a co-ed class, where sex education is being discussed by the teacher? Both the teacher and the response from the children. What is it actually like?
So, firstly, I would like to point out that mostly it's not discussed in classes, right? Even in 10th, when we did have a chapter on the reproductive system, on family planning measures, it wasn't really taught. Teachers just skipped through it. So, a lot of children had an issue with it that, why aren't you teaching it?
Right.
It is something very natural. So, we were in 10th. Even by that time, we were okay with it. But yeah, when we were being taught about menstruation when we were in 6th or 7th, that people were giggling, or we found it really funny, I guess.
Yeah.
So because it wasn't something we were used to, it was the first time we were exposed to information of that kind. But by the time we are in 10th or 12th, it's nothing new, we know about it already. It's just that we would rather have it from a genuine source. I would rather have information from a reliable source, which I think teachers fail to deliver.
Right.
And if teachers are okay with it, like in 11th and 12th, I had a psychology teacher who was okay with speaking about it because it was a part of our course. So when she was okay with it, people didn't giggle. They understood that it's nothing perverse, it's something natural, it's a part of the course. So it also depends on how the teacher discusses it.
Right. Dr. Prabhat Pankaj, I'd like to bring you in here because, sometimes we have a situation where there's too much information but not enough knowledge. So children think they know everything, but it turns out actually that they don't know enough, or they know some parts but not everything. Have you had that experience, Dr. Pankaj? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sure, sure. Yes, thank you. I'll take forward Srijani's point
Hmm.
because that's very interesting points he has made.
Yeah.
I have two children, one daughter and one son, and we used to talk very freely with them. But as a parent, like father, I sometimes had the hesitation in talking about the women sex issues with my daughter. But I could speak to my son more freely than my daughter. But of course, we exchange quite a lot in the family. And my fortunately, my wife is very comfortable talking about these subjects to both the kids. So the things are moving on. But taking Srijani's point forward, I had a long conversation with my son asking about how these things are being taught at
How old
school.
is your son?
He's in 12. He has
Okay.
just given examination, so it's the right age to ask this question. So
Right.
accumulative experience of class 9, 10, 11, and 12. So he
Right.
actually started from ninth. So, and a very interesting point he made, and I would like to put forward is the
Sure.
point not from the parent side, but rather it's representing the students, these
Yeah.
points. So he said the biology teacher, of course, is assigned to teach these chapters. And
Right.
how the students take this chapter is like one of the chapters that they have to finish for examination. Oh, that's
Right.
very interesting perspective. So if it is taught and being perceived by the student as one of the chapters to be finished for the examination, then there is no learning over there. That's number one. So, I'm bringing my perspective now. This is the student's perspective. Now I'm bringing my perspective as a parent. So, I'm also a teacher. So, I can mix these two together and give you a
Yeah.
perspective. So there is something called the teaching process.
Right.
So as a teacher you go to the class, deliver, and go out, and your job is over. So your whole job is to deliver the topic. And sometimes he also indicated that the teachers actually will read out the text. So the
Right.
paragraph is read out, and then the teacher will ask, do you have any question? And if the child don't have any questions, he will move on. If the
Yeah.
child has question, then she will answer those questions. So it's a teaching process. So what we have taken it for is that we have taken it as a pure teaching process, while
Right.
the whole subject of sexuality is not to be driven by the teaching process. It's
Right.
absolutely wrong way of doing it. It's actually a mentoring process. It's not a
Yeah.
teaching process, right? So I was talking to one of my friend, and we were talking about parenting, uh, and he made a very strong statement. He said, parenting is not the process where the children's grow, because if parenting would have been about children's growing, they will grow even otherwise, even without
Right.
parenting. So it's not a process where the children's grow. It's actually the process where the parents grow, not the children.
Yes.
As the parents who
Yeah.
fail to grow with the child are the one who
Yeah.
falls into bad parenting. So bad parenting is very simple to understand. It's parents inability to grow with the children, and so is the case with the teachers. And with sex education, I feel that there is a need to change the perspective in a U-turn. So, we have to
Right.
take a U-turn actually. So that's my initial thought. I'll add on, if some more points come in. Yeah.
No, certainly. I'd like to come back to you about the U-turn. I think that's an interesting thought. But before that, I'd like to bring Hajiji. Hajiji, what are the legal implications of these issues? Because while we are talking about issues that are actually adult issues, the child is still a minor usually, and
Right.
all the acts that are applicable about minors and their sexuality are applicable to them too. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. Although they're legally still not adults, you do have to approach them as adults because they're shortly going to be adults. So, what is the legal position here?
All right. I'm glad that this point has been raised about the legal issues. Uh, First and foremost, we need to understand what exactly we mean by sex education.
Right.
You see,
mostly when we talk about sex education, it is assumed that it is basically about teaching the chapter on reproduction and biology classes. It
Right.
is not. Sex education is not teaching the child about sex. It is about a lot of things, including, say, for example, gender sensitivity. It's also
Right.
about laws concerning this issue. It is also about being sensitive about on how you speak, how you talk, how you respond to the opposite sex. And to my understanding, one of the most important thing here is about keeping our children safe.
Yeah.
So when we are restricting ourselves to only teaching them about the reproductive parts, or the chapter on reproduction, or the mere act of what we call sex, I think we are failing in our duties there. Talking about the point of law, I may start with an example here. Take, for example, uh, when we talk about the sex education, it is so very important to teach our kids, to teach our children as friends, as their parents, as their guardians, as their protectors, that the very concept of consent does not come into picture for them. You see, a lot of youngsters these days, thanks to the social media and all the web series and everything that is happening around, they tend to think that it is absolutely all right when they get into this act by their own consent. But then we have to be very clear. Law does not understand the concept of consent from anybody who is under 18 years of age. So two minors, anybody, let's say two 16 or 17-year-old people getting into act of sexual diligence by their something that they might call free will, it is not recognized by law. To my understanding, sex education should also include and should cover the realms of protection. We should be very comfortably be able to teach our children as to what is supposed to happen if they encounter a episode of that sort. I'm sure we all understand. I'm sure everybody in the panel would agree with me here that the tales and episodes and stories of child sexual harassment and child sexual abuse are not uncommon. Every now and then we keep hearing a family member, somebody from near and dear from the family, somebody who is probably a driver, a school teacher, a coaching teacher, somebody in the family is or has harassed the children. To my understanding, this education should also be covering this issue that if something of that sort happens, where should they go? Whom should they seek the comfort? As far as the law is concerned, I would first and foremost say that post 2012, we have a very special law. We have a fast track law, I can say, that for the protection of children. It is called POXO. I'm sure most of us here have heard of it. POXO stands for, it's a law for protection of children. It is a special law. It covers, it is a gender neutral law, irrespective of the gender. It is applicable. It can be a female harassing a male or vice versa. Special courts have been constituted for trial. Special procedure has been laid down. In fact, the time periods are quick. This law does not talk about dragging the matters in the court. It talks about quick disposal of the cases and a very special, meticulously drafted law on how to protect the children. It can be protection in terms of privacy. It can be protection in terms of harassment in the court. Nobody is going to ask you lengthy questions. Nobody is going to harass the child by putting him right in front of the accused, the perpetrator who has committed this kind of thing. So yeah, to my understanding, this is what the modern sex education should be. Not only talking about those traditional ancient concepts, but the modern concepts of sensitivity as to the sex and protection from sex.
Great. May I bring in Kavita here?
Yes, ma'am.
Kavita, here, we hear about the legal aspect of it. And the point being that it's a continuing process. It is not, just case by case. Sex education has to be a continuing dialogue between parents, teachers, students, the whole community. That doesn't happen. From my observation, we tend to move from crisis to crisis, especially in this age of social media and boys locker room. So how do you make it a continuous process? That is the biggest challenge, isn't it? Because so many other problems that a school has. I presume this comes a little way down in the priority, and it should not, perhaps.
Yeah, it does. It's supposed to be first. It
Yeah,
comes first because child safety is your first. As a school leader, that's absolutely before even imparting education. You have to ensure that the children are safe.
exactly.
So, your child protection and your ability to have your committees, your ability to have posh in the staff room, for example, which is
Yeah,
also a very important thing. That's you preventing sexual harassment of any kind, whether for a child or an adult, are absolutely imperative. That comes first. So only when you have a safe environment can you actually have teaching and learning happening. However, to respond to what Harjeet has just said, it's 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, when I had to put a POXO case against a person from my school. It
oh,
was not easy to do that. I actually had to explain the law to the police.
right.
My principal was in really sort of had to take the lead in this, and it was very important that the parents and the children and everybody understood what that law was and why we had to go to the police in the first place, and the management had to understand it as well. So
Right.
it's not a simple thing of saying that there's a law and you can act on it. You have to actually deal with society. I remember the time that I decided that we will have sex education in the school. I had a posse of mothers landing up in my office and gherowing me, saying, "You cannot start this because if you do,
Really?
yeah." I
How
mean,
old were the How old were the kids?
so in the school that I was working with at that time, we started it in the fifth grade,
Right.
and it was totally age appropriate, totally about the whole business of how do you say no, what
Right.
that is a good touch, bad touch.
Right.
And then we, in fact, slowly brought it down to first grade because we realized that this is something that actually, we need to maybe start in the pre-primary, the
Right.
good touch and bad touch.
Yeah.
So it's really not something that you start only in the 8th, ninth, 10th, 11th.
Yeah.
And let's remember that the children who get abused are really young.
Yeah.
And they know they need to be able to identify when a touch or a look or a feel is good or not comfortable. So I think but the mothers were convinced that if I was beginning it, it would lead to sex
Yeah.
in the right. So that was where the whole difficulty lies.
How
That you
did you handle it, Kavita?
So, obviously, you have to have innumerable conversations
Yeah.
with the parents, with the teachers, with students about like why is this important? What is it that we are trying to, what's the purpose? Let's try and remember why should we talk about this? And
Right.
actually, there's a big question mark about why should we even look at schools having to provide sex education?
Yeah.
Why not?
Right.
I just heard Prabhat saying that he and his wife talk to the children.
Yeah.
So it's like everything seems to be dumped on the schools, to like you manage the kids, you manage everything from like ABC down to how they should be able to manage their social life and their sexual lives, and that's quite an ask because you don't have teachers who are necessarily coming from a very liberal space themselves. They have huge difficulties in talking to the children. You might have male teachers who find it very difficult to talk
Yeah.
to girl children in the school. So it's really tough,
Right.
and it's not something that can be just a textbook like you heard just now is not the solution.
Absolutely.
How you transact that information.
Yeah. Srijani, what is your take on this? Because, between parents and teachers, where do the students feel more comfortable?
I think it really depends from person to person, I have to be honest. uh, because sometimes in schools we find some teachers to be those kind of people who we can trust, like
Right.
I won't approach any and every teacher about it, right?
Right.
I have in my mind right now who I would approach. But
Right.
at the same time, when I was even younger, like when I was in 8th or ninth, there were a few senior guys who felt like who made me feel very uncomfortable. Some passed really sexually colored remarks, but I didn't know what to do about it because now I know about POXO, now I know about all of this, but at that time I didn't. And I think the school, yes, it had an anti-sexual harassment committee, but the thing that you have to spread awareness, that you have to build a trust with them that these are the people you have to approach if something goes wrong. This is what will happen. And see, I have to be honest, a lot of girls, my peers, I've heard from them, the reason they don't approach parents or teachers is that mostly we have this very prevalent culture of victim blaming.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all out there. So if for example I said that this happened with me, the first thing people would say is, why were you out, why were you
Right.
out with guys,
Right. Right.
you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that. And the first thing which will go away is my freedom,
Right.
right? Don't go for that, don't. Eventually my mom will have to let me go, but no one is willing to undermine their freedom
Yeah.
just because this happened, because this happens with a lot of girls.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen with guys, but generally victim blaming, girls are victimized, and like they are always blamed for it. So I
Right.
think we are in a tough spot as children, because sometimes like our parents are willing to talk about it, but we are not willing to speak to them, I guess, because we don't know what the consequences will be.
Yeah. And do you see a difference between the way boys respond to a situation like this and the way girls respond to it? Do girls fear the loss of freedom more than the boys?
Obviously, because like mostly, see, a guy, my friend, he did face sexual harassment, but he didn't say anything because guys are expected to like it or enjoy it. So I'm
Was
not
it
going to
from a boy or from
from a girl.
right?
So he did feel uncomfortable, he was violated, but he didn't say anything because in our culture boys are supposed to like it.
Right.
So, yes, but yeah, I have to be honest, boys are more free when talking about this, because in our culture, female desire, female sexuality is anywhere taboo, much
Right.
more than men's desire will ever be. For example, speaking about this might make people a little bit uncomfortable, but
Oh
I
no,
feel
go ahead.
so. Boys are willing to talk about masturbation. A
Right.
lot of parents have caught their sons
Right.
in the, but they're let go, it's normal and everything.
Right.
But even with the boys locker room thing, people were so surprised. I wasn't,
Right.
frankly, because I am in school, I've seen how boys talk. And sex education, as Mr. Harjeet pointed out, what does it include? I genuinely believe sex education should include concepts of consent. Like, I know by the law
Right.
it doesn't really, it's not consent at all if you're a
Right.
minor.
Right.
And I genuinely believe that there is a space for laws for adolescent sexuality too. But otherwise, also, these children will grow up, right? They should be like, they should understand the concept of consent,
Right.
enthusiastic consent, which a
Right.
lot of people don't, especially boys.
Yeah.
So I think there's a space for that even in sex education.
Yeah. Before we end this point, Srijani, I'd just like to bring in that other aspect, of the ratings. Girls and boys, from what I know, have a rating system as well. Both girls and boys. The girls rate the boys, and the boys rate the girls out of 10, etc. And it begins quite early. What is your view on it? Do you find it offensive? Do you find it natural? What do you think?
I think, like, honestly, I haven't done it because I don't know, putting it into numbers anyway, I don't like numbers.
Yeah.
So I'm like, see, it's pretty natural to be attracted, but not a lot of people do that. But see, you have to see the context. A
Right.
lot of times I have seen, as I mentioned, I didn't find the boys' locker room thing very surprising because
Right.
I've heard boys make really disgusting comments. But I honestly, I'm not saying it from a girl's perspective, but I haven't heard girls say that offensive things about guys
Right.
personally. Really disgusting remarks. I haven't heard it at least. So yeah, it's the rating thing. It's from person to person, but what are you rating them on?
Yeah.
Like, I'll be honest, I do rate guys on whether they are dumb or not. I do that. I'm like,
That's okay.
God, this boy needs to stop. Why is he talking? That sort of a thing. But yeah, some people make really, like, I won't, comment on a guy's sexual parts, but boys
Right.
do that for girls, which is, I
Right.
think, really offensive.
Right. Dr. Prabhat, may I bring you in here? When we talk about sort of a U-turn in the conversation, the U-turn has to begin here by acknowledging that children will talk about sex and they will have sex in some form or the other. Whether society likes it or not, whether it's legally recognized or not. So, given that, how do parents deal with it? Um,
So it's
Dr.
a very
Prabhat, do I have you here? Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. So very interesting dimension, and we need to think a little more on this. There is
Yeah,
one comment also has come in the chat, which talks about whether there should be parent and teachers training both should understand these
exactly.
subjects equally.
I
So there
found
was a
that a very
comment over that.
interesting question,
Yes,
Dr.
very interesting
Prabhat.
questions.
That
So I would like to,
I'll
yeah,
just read it. I'll just read it out to you so that we have the
yeah,
context.
I have read that
But
question. You can
no,
read
I
it
want
for
to
the
read it out to you. Yeah.
for everyone.
The question is: should we not look at sex education and sensitization of parents and teachers simultaneously too? They grew up in a generation where sex education was taboo. Their mental conditioning must be blocked. Very interesting.
Very nice. So I'll just go point wise. So I'll make 3 points over here. So point number
Yeah.
one. Point number one. I'm taking clue from Sirjani and I'm talking. I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of the children as a parent. I may be wrong, but Sirjani can correct me. So there is a sheer trend of converting this whole sex talks among peers
Yeah.
into a comedy. So
Right.
and there is a lot of comedy that is attached to sexual talks. Say for example, as a common person, we have never we must be remembering something, some kind of sentence that we attach to, and we speak quite often. We say, "Oh, tomorrow post office khula hua hai." I mean
Ah,
these kind
right.
of things. So when children they talk, where is the major source? What is the major source of their learning? If you look at
Right.
children's, if the school curriculum is restricted and it's about teaching, more of a teaching rather than mentoring, then where from they get the knowledge? So by the 11 and 12, they know everything. But which are the sources from where they get? So that's very important to look at from the for the parents as well as for the teachers. So these sources are peer talk. So
Yeah.
they do a lot of peer talk, and unfortunately in peer talks there is a lot of comedy involved in it, and there is a juvenile learning as well involved into it, and that's why it becomes sometimes very obnoxious, sometimes very dirty, sometimes it goes funny and something like that. So it's not actually accurate knowledge that the students are actually talking among themselves. That's the one deficit. Second, they get it from internet, they get it from movies, they get it from other literature, and look at them. They are not perfect, that's number one, and they are dangerous as well. At some point of time it might actually harm them, and therefore the
Right.
parents have to understand one thing, that if sex is not to be taught by them to their own kids, then there are some dogs out there who will teach the sex to them, to their children. So they have a
Exactly.
choice to make. They have a choice to
Yeah.
make. Parents have to make a choice, are you going to teach the sex to your children, or would you let some dogs to teach sex to your children? So this is your choice, right? So that's the point
Right.
number one trying to make. Point number two, look at parents. When you have a baby and the baby is small and the baby is so connected to you and will come to you and will tell you everything. As a parents we have experienced this. They will not hide, rather they will actually go flaring up the situation, the whole scenario, and they'll tell you so much of the stories, and they share so much. Well, look at the way they grow up, and when they grow up become 5, they 6, 7, 8, the sharing part actually keeps on declining with the age. And at
Mm.
the age of 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, they are not sharing anything with you. So as a
Right.
parent, we have to understand this, why they are not sharing with us. And the same child, when they go to the school, as Srijani has rightly said, that if she has to share something, she will go to a particular teacher whom she can
Right.
confide. So, out of a lot of so many teachers in the school or counselor in the school, the children will confide in one or two, not more than that. Because the children has the confidence that this teacher has the hearing, very good hearing, right, and is able to listen, and she is a good counselor. Now the question is that, is the presence of a counselor in a school is a good news for the parents or a bad news for the parents? I will say it's a bad news for the parents, though it is for the
Why?
good. It is for the good that the counselor is there in the school, but the very fact that your child has to go to the counselor is a bad news for the parents. So you need to
Yeah.
understand before the children actually goes out of hand and they need a counselor, you need to develop yourself into a counselor. If you're not, and that's why I said, I made this point very in the beginning itself, the parenting is not about children's growing, parenting is about parents growing, and therefore there is a very huge need for the parents to understand all these educated. But of course it's not, India is a very big country and it's not so easy to make all this happening in our society. There is a division between urban and rural as well. There is a division between educated, non-educated. There's a lot of things to take care of, but the fact remains, however we do it. Point number three, it also gives you this. This is my last point I would like to make for the points that has been raised so far. But I'll add something more later. But this is my last point. The last point I'm trying to make it is that we need to make a U-turn in the sense that sex education is to be seen as part of the life skill rather than just a chapter in the book. So that's the point I would like to make. I mean, if you talk about life skills, let's say for a children, there is something called decision making, let's say, or something like negotiation. There
Right.
is such a huge role of decision making and negotiation in sexual education, and when they grow up and in developing their own sexuality, they need communication, they need listening, they need decision making, they need negotiation, they also need to learn how to say no to certain things, they also need to learn how to ask for the help. Many children in rural area and other places, vulnerable family, and I must say, Harjit has raised this point. You look at the vulnerable household. The number of vulnerable households in India has increased in COVID time. And we
Right.
have read all these news in the paper that the domestic violence has increased in COVID time. So vulnerable households, if you look at the vulnerable household, you can imagine what is going to be the situation over there, how
Right.
disadvantaged the children are. They're not able to even say anything. They're not even express themselves. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to seek help, where to seek help. They don't know how to say no. They don't know how to ask things. These are life
Right.
skills. These are life skills. And therefore, the U-turn, in my opinion, in sex education is that we need to look at it from the uh, U-turn point of view. And for teachers, the angle is that it's not just a classroom stuff. All you need is to create some small peer groups and conduct regular debate on different topics, different aspects, different you know uh, the kind of language that we use, even the language that we use at home is also very significant, play a very significant role in making the girls feel safe or unsafe.
Yeah.
And in one way or the other is the parents who use them these language, their relatives, they use those language, right? So it plays a very, so one of the ways that you create affinity groups. So there are many children who are serious about this topic. They want to learn more. They want to get themselves equipped. So why don't we create an affinity group?
Right.
The children who have the affinity to this particular topic create an affinity group and conduct a regular talk among themselves. Serve a tea to them. Why don't they make them sit on the table, serve coffee to them from the school side, and say, "Oh, you are a wonderful group. You are going to talk about a particular topic, which is a taboo for others. So let there be a recording of that discussion. Let there be some minutes recorded out of those discussions. Let these children go and talk to the larger class. This is the way forward. And this is what, when I say U-turn, I mean all these. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I go to Hajiji, Kavita and Srijani, I'd like your opinion on this. A very interesting idea. You think it would work, Kavita, creating these affinity groups among students?
Well, they already exist. I mean, I
Okay.
don't think you have to create them because there are enough informal such groups. I think they're
Informally.
yeah,
Yeah.
they learn from each other. But I think that a couple of things here. I think we have to remember that the way people look at sexuality is embedded in the cultural fabric, right? We have so we are not. This is not a separate topic. This is the way we
Right.
live our full lives. And when we're talking about pornography going up or child abuse going up or
Yeah.
abuse of women going up during COVID because of this, this is exactly what it tells you that this is what the problem actually is. You're actually dealing with a whole patriarchal way of
Yeah.
living, which is what you're trying to fight against through sex education. And I don't think that's like really possible. I honestly think that you have to be able to examine the way your parents relate to each other, who has the power structures in the house. Does your mother ever have a chance to say no if she doesn't want to? Are really in so many families, think about the fact that the walls are paper thin. You
Yeah.
think they don't hear what's going on? Do you think that they don't hear the kind of relationship that the parents have? Of course they do. So it's not a simple thing of simply saying, okay, let's use because. And first of all, I'm really asking, do we have to call it sex education? It causes so many problems in this country
Right.
because it's completely culturally problematic.
Yeah.
Why don't we think about calling it, I don't know, developmental education or self awareness?
Yeah. Exactly. Why not? Self-awareness is a very good term. Yeah.
So if we call it that, we probably be able to discuss huge amounts of things in it,
Right.
rather than just calling it something
I
which again it's a response or a reaction, and then people fight it and say we don't want it, we don't believe in it, this is not acceptable in our culture. So you have all of that happening because you call it that, right?
Yeah.
Why not call it something acceptable and actually go through with it?
I really agree,
Kavita,
appreciate
just
this
one.
point. I
Sorry.
really appreciate this point raised by Kavita. At many places, I know they call it adult, development.
Yeah. Kavita, I just want to go back to this point and ask you that is there a sense of a lot of, blame, a bit of a blame game between the teachers and the parents when it comes to identifying cases of, say, sexual misdemeanor or sexual abuse? Then, it comes to the point of saying, oh, he must have learned it at home, or the teacher saying, or the parents saying, no, no, he learned it in, or she learned it in school. Is there a sense of that blame game that happens? Have
It
you faced that?
happens for everything. It's like it happens for the use of bad language.
Yeah.
So I mean, parents will come and saying we don't use anything of that kind in our
Right.
family. And you're
Right.
kind of saying, all right, fine, but that's like that's not the way we hear about it. So there is that tension between the parent and the teacher is I think as old as the school when it
Uh,
started probably. I don't think it's going to go away in schools which are traditional. I've seen it going away in schools where they really care about a collaboration between the teacher and the parent. So where there is a very close rapport
right.
that the school has with the parents, that's where children really have the ability to. Those are the kinds of schools that believe in a partnership. They believe that the parents are meant to be brought into the school and not kept out at the gates.
Right.
And those are the schools where I have seen very healthy conversations happening three-way between the parent, the child, and the teacher.
Right.
But I think it's possible to do that. I think it's possible to have circle time in school. I think many things are possible. The issue is of course that when you broach it in a staff room, the first thing you hear is the syllabus is so much. How
Yeah.
am I going to have time to do all of this?
Right.
It's easier to hand it over to the counselor. How many schools have a counselor? I mean,
Exactly.
we're talking about counselors being bad news, but actually there are hardly any counselors.
Right.
And I hope that one day we treat like we treat going to a doctor, we should treat going to a counselor like that. When you really have a problem and you've got a problem at home and you don't have anyone to talk to, you've got a couple of teachers who are decent,
Right.
you do need somebody who's an outsider to
Right.
that.
And of course, we're hearing so much about mental health these days, with the celebrity suicides and everybody talking about the need to speak to people. I think, of course, that's important. Srijani, may I bring you in here and may I ask for your perspective on this? Do students get caught between the parent and the teacher sometimes?
Oh yeah, always. I have to be honest. It always happens. I'll take again the example of boys' locker room.
Right.
Right. So people tend to think I'm just using that example because everyone knows about it.
Exactly.
Right. So people tend to think, oh, that's not my son. Oh,
Right.
that's not my friend. Oh, that's not my brother.
Right.
But he is a product of this society. You have to understand that he's
Right.
as much a product of school and the bad language as much as it is at home.
Right.
Right. And as Mr. Prabhat said, while I do think that peer learning does work, but I genuinely feel it might not have the desired consequences. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because so when I felt that there was this need for gender sensitization workshops in my school, I approached some authorities in my school. They took it up really quick, right? They built a whole workshop curriculum and everything. So but that doesn't happen in every school,
Right.
right? And secondly, you have to understand that my authority is very different from a teacher's. When a
Right.
teacher teaches it, it will, when she has that authority. Like if I talk about it, most people will be like, why are you speaking about it? You're just like a year older or 2 years older or just my age. Or and plus, especially coming from a girl, they don't want to hear it because it's still a taboo,
Mm.
right? When I have tried to point it out to some people, like I remember once
Mm.
this parent in the PTM meeting, she had this concern that she actually said it to the teacher that my son has been watching pornographic material. And everyone in the class, all of us, we started laughing. We couldn't control, even though our parents were there.
Right.
Right. So these boys kept teasing him for 1 month straight.
Right.
Right. But I genuinely felt, so I said it. Like I'm the kind of person, if I feel something, I'll say it. So I was like, Ki, what is wrong with watching porn? You guys do it too. I know that. So and then they were like, you're a girl and everything. So the whole girl aspect comes that, it's still a taboo that
Right.
girls cannot talk about all of this.
Right.
Right. And it is the truth that, there are adolescent relationships, there are intimate relationships.
Right.
I think it's high time that the law and parents accept that so that they can, save them from or protect them from unwanted circumstances.
I agree. I agree. And in fact, that's a very good point for me to bring Harjeet in. Harjeet, how does the law deal with such a situation? Because, these are 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, sometimes younger than that. They, if you put a boy and girl together, there will be some amount, there can be some amount of intimacy, but the
Right.
law tends to, you know, treat this as something that is, illegal or unwanted. And there is also the additional point which someone has raised in the chat, that who gets blamed usually, the boy or the girl, especially if they're underage. And the question is, when they get carried away during a moment, does it not often happen that the boy or the girl gets blamed more?
Right. Okay. Uh, Before I answer that question, Kaveri, I'll pick up from where Kavita ma'am left.
Yeah.
It is often quoted every time there is some rape case in Delhi or anywhere in India. We keep start jumping around that we should teach our boys. There
Right.
should be education. You see, this is exactly what the problem is. We would only react to it, and we never respond to a situation.
Right.
Like, it has to be understood that when we talk about sex education, it is once again not about just one or two talks. It is not about one or two chapters.
Right.
We have to understand there's a difference between teaching and preaching.
Right.
When you see your father, especially North India, Delhi, you see almost all families in Delhi, we keep hearing males using all these cuss words. All right. Every now and then I would hear somebody or the other abusing somebody's mother or sister. So when
Right.
you have this kind of atmosphere in the family, how do you expect your young ones to learn? So there has to be a difference between teaching and preaching. You
Right.
don't preach them. You see, you teach them, and you can only teach them if you learn your own self. Somebody has raised this question repeatedly in the chat also as to
Yeah.
what is the solution. You see, flagging the problems repeatedly is not solution in itself.
Right.
All right, no matter how strongly we flag a problem, we might not be able to give a solution. So to my understanding, for our audience, the solution is education for the parents first. You see,
Right.
child comes much later in time.
Right.
To quote an example here, are we saying that stealing, robbery,
Right.
murder perhaps is less of an offense? Is it less bad? Is it okay? No, of course not. We do teach our children not to steal from very beginning, from class 1 or class 2 or probably in class nursery itself. We start teaching those stories कि वो एक चोर ने ऐसा किया, उसकी मदर ने उसको ऐसा समझाया. and chori karna buri baat hai. This is something that you teach to a toddler, to somebody who starts walking perhaps, right? So if you can talk about the sense of good and bad from that young age, and of course I don't have to tell anybody that we do hear examples of very young children stealing. Taking a toffee from your sibling is also an example of stealing. We teach them from the very beginning itself that this is bad. Similarly, you have to teach them, you have to talk to them that also it is bad to use cuss words. It's also bad to shame somebody on the basis of gender. It is also equally bad to type something on the internet which is borderline sexual abuse.
Right.
Coming on to the law part of it.
Yeah.
Well, the law, if I talk about purely technical sense of law, the law is absolutely crystal and strict about it. Under 18, underage, getting into any sexual act or passing any lewd comments or stalking, or again, popular concept these days, we are not living in a society which is only restricted to the physical world. The concept of offenses, crimes, stalking, bullying, harassment, abuse, it is not restricted to the physical world, streets, cinema, schools.
Right.
In fact, major chunk of these cases are happening on the virtual world, on internet.
Right.
So it has to be learned that one chapter or one talk or one session or one classroom lecture would not help. It has to be imbibed in their psyche. I just a couple of days ago I read this news article which said that some celebrity has reported to the Mumbai police that some youngster, somebody who's probably just 16 years of age, made a very harsh comment upon this lady, and that was a sexually colored remark. You see, you have to teach, you have to make them understand. And on the point of law, the law does not, there is, to my understanding, if I say strictly, the law would not give you a second chance about it. You have done something bad, you have to be punished on that. All right. So then comes a question here. Should we scare our youngsters by talking about law only, or should we prepare them?
Yeah.
I'll quote an example here.
Yeah.
I'll quote an example here. Say, for example, every single parent understands that you give a car to a minor, somebody who's less than 18 years of age, it's an offense.
Yeah.
He or she might cause an accident. He or she might damage the car. He or she might get injured himself or herself. Do we still give them car? Yes. Is it illegal? Definitely yes. Nevertheless, we do talk about it. We prepare them. We want them not to use it, but nevertheless, we have this in our mind that ye karega to sahi. He or she would do it. So we do prepare them. So my understanding would be, and my advice to all my dear friends and young buddies and their parents and teachers would be, you see, it is nice that you talk about them, but let's be aware of the practical realities as well. You see, sex education should not only be about scaring them, but it also has to be about protection.
Right.
Take, for example, when we talk about the American concept of a US concept of date, you have to teach your youngsters that when a couple of young people, maybe 15, 16, to my understanding, these days, these young kids, they start dating at probably 9th standard, maybe earlier, maybe little later. There is no, taken for granted concept when I go on a date. Say I am a female, I study in class 10th and I go out on a date with a guy. So there is no taken for granted concept. There is no understanding concept that he is bound to hold my hand. No, it is not. Now, all these things you will be able to talk to your kids only when you yourself are comfortable about it.
Right.
You cannot keep scaring them कि चोरी करोगे तो jail चले जाओगे. This line would not help you at all. All right. So here comes the concept of sensitivity. As Prabhat and Kavita very rightly pointed out, why are we calling it education per se? It has to be part of the personality growth. As Prabhat very rightly pointed out, point remains, if you do not talk about it, then they would hear about it from somewhere else.
Right.
All right. This point has been repeatedly raised in the chat section as well, as to who is to be blamed. Please understand, people, uh, gone are the days where we would say that अगर लड़का लड़की दोनों involved है तो only the boy or the chap will be responsible. No, that is not the case. The modern law that we talk about, it's a gender neutral law. All right, it can be, anybody can be a perpetrator here. It can be a male or a female. I cannot answer that question in terms of binary, yes or no, but it depends upon the facts and circumstances. It depends upon the investigation, how it goes.
Right.
It can very well be a case that a female can also be made a perpetrator or accused for harassment of a boy. Srijani was pointing out at an example.
Yeah.
It is commonly believed. Yes, I would not deny that there is, of course, a bias in against males. But then, at least now, the law allows you that space to think that there is a scope of the other sex also playing the role of a perpetrator. So I believe I've answered that question.
Yeah. May I just bring Srijani here? Srijani, what do you think about that point?
Sorry, which one? Which
The
Harjeet?
point, which Harjeet just made about, the blame between the boy and the girl. Now it's more equal in a way. Is
So-
that good?
Yeah, I do think it's good because honestly, I have seen girls, making making moves which make boys uncomfortable. I have witnessed it. So I do think there's scope for making laws gender neutral. And the thing here is that the POXO Act, while I was reading up about it, and I've also heard about this, that some parents, when they get to know about their teenage child's relationship, they misuse it. Like, I won't say misuse, but yeah, they do use it. Like, they file a case against the other person that they were harassing my child or whatever. But it was not exactly like by law, it was harassment, but their kid did give consent. They were into that relationship and that intimacy. So yeah, I do think there's scope for a lot of change. And as Harjeet pointed out, I think like I would like to point out in sex education, yeah, this term sex education attracts a lot of criticism from parents.
Right.
I've seen it in schools. You mention the term sex and people are just like, no, 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 whatever.
So true.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you curing yourself? Have you seen the growth rate of our population? And you're still so like, so in sex education, I think it has to be, of course, age appropriate. But
Right.
like bad touch, good touch thing, my sister is in class 3. She was taught about it, and I'm glad she was.
Right.
But at the same time, at home, my mom talked to her about it. That,
Right.
you come to me if you feel uncomfortable. You come to
Right.
me. There has to be, Kavita ma'am is right. Just teaching in schools does not work, has never worked, it will never work. There has to be a welcoming approach at home.
Right.
Right. So I feel that this bad touch, good touch thing, it's great because on that you can build up over the years. Right. I'll give you an example. When we are taught about menstrual health management,
Right.
so generally there's a pad company, like a commercial
Yeah.
pad company, which will teach us about it.
Right.
So now that I've grown up and I'm working in the field, I have realized there are quite a few problems with that.
Right.
Firstly, they market their product, which is a sanitary napkin,
Right.
right? And they only talk about, the biological process, that there's a lining in the uterus and it comes out and everything. But beyond that, they don't talk about anything. Menstrual disorders, alternatives to sanitary napkins. Because if my brand is selling a sanitary napkin, why would I talk about menstrual cups or
Right.
tampons?
Right.
Right. So even in that, there's scope for a lot of improvement, a lot of additions, right? And in sex education, over time, you have to like talk about many different things. Of course, you have to teach children eventually the concept of consent, and as I think Harjeet sir pointed out, that in their psyche, it has to be embedded in their psyche. But if you think you can talk about this when they're in 11th and 12th and get it into their psyche, you're wrong.
Right.
Because my principal used to say this quite often: catch them when they're young for anything. And teaching kids anything, catch them when they're young. And I always used to be like, what is his obsession with catching them young? But now I get it, because by fifth standard you're really forming your thought process, your
Right.
belief. And if you catch them at that time, of course, I'm not telling you to talk about everything, but you have to form that basis about, what is a good touch, what is a bad
Yeah.
touch, and then you build upon it.
Right.
In sex education, you can talk about a lot of things. For example, birth control methods.
Mm.
In a biology class, so in NCRT, there are quite a few options given.
Right.
This you can do, this you can do that. I had questions about it. A lot of us did actually, but the teacher didn't answer it. Right. So we had a problem with it. That why aren't you answering? It
Right.
is for our future, and it's very important, right? So there are a lot of things. Then again, I genuinely believe it can be a place for teaching kids acceptance of LGBTQ
Right.
community, in the sense that you teach them not just in gender binary
Yeah.
terms,
Yeah.
right? And counselors, honestly, I have had a very good experience with my counselors, at least in schools. And this friend of mine, he was queer, so I told him that, you can go to this counselor, because I genuinely believe she is not homophobic. She will listen to you and she'll be there. So I think there's space for quite a few things in sex education, and we really need to think what all to incorporate.
I agree with you. Dr. Pankaj, may I bring you in here and talk a little about the fact that, in fact, that's one of the questions as well. How can children be prepared when the parents or society is not open to such conversations? And given that you also are working in small, you have institutions in smaller towns, is there a difference in the conversation when one moves towards smaller towns?
Uh, Fundamentally, I do not see the, uh, the kind of conversation and the trend that I talked about in the beginning itself. That when it comes to the
Right.
peer group discussion in sex, then lot of emphasis is on creating comedy out of it, and blaming each other or something like that. So that particular trend is not changed. But of course, there is an impact. Rural and urban differences will be there. So, and the impact of education will also be there. But the unfortunate thing about the educated lot as well is that we understand it in a very, not in a very holistic perspective.
Right.
Actually, so that is the problem I can see. We understand it in isolation. The moment we say sex education, we are looking at is in isolation. And most of us have agreed to the fact that it cannot be looked at only as an isolation. So there are three layers that we need to focus on, and all three layers cannot be, monologue. It has to be a very complete package. So the first layer that we talk about is the emotional stability of the children. Now,
Right.
when it comes to the emotional stability of the children, it's a very, interesting term, and we need to understand the parents and the teachers in the school. Is there any built-in mechanism in the school? Is there a process? Is there a way of mentoring? Is there a way of counseling, which actually makes the children more stable mentally, and not vulnerable? So that's why I said, when I said that, this is more like a life skill thing
Yeah.
rather than education per se, information based education per se. I'm not denying information is very critical. I'll talk about it in a while, just now. But emotional stability is the one layer. So, if you ask me the question, whose responsibility is this? Yeah, of course, it's parents' responsibility. It starts from the home. Somebody has written that everything starts from the home. That's very true. And the early mind makeup that the children grow with, it actually happens at the household. It doesn't happen in the
Right.
school actually. So school come a little later. The first mindset is created there over there. So that's number one. Number two is sound knowledge. Now, the sound knowledge. Somebody has written
Yeah.
why I have used the word dog. I did not use the word
Yeah.
dog for any men or any person. I use the dog as a symbol to suggest that it's a substandard or suboptimal information that the children
Right.
are exposed to. So they are going to learn from suboptimal information or wrong information, or should they learn from the sound information? So that is how I use this, the word dog. Uh, so sound knowledge is very important, and here lies the
So question about
role of teacher. Here is the
Yeah.
role of teacher. Teacher's role is very important in imparting the sound knowledge. So it has to be a
Yeah.
knowledgeable teacher who knows everything ins and outs and well
Yeah. One
researched.
second,
Yeah.
Dr. Prabhat. Kavita, did you have something to say here?
Mm,
Yeah, so the question I wanted to ask Prabhat is,
mm,
when you listen to most parents, they have two things to say. They say, "हमने तो कभी ये सब सुना नहीं था."
Right.
Nobody ever taught us any of this. So why should we have to teach it to our children? ये तो this is normal, natural part of life. ये तो हो ही जाता है, सबको समझ आ जाती है. So there's no need to do this as a specific, separate thing to be taught to
Right.
children. हमें हमारे साथ ऐसी बात नहीं हुई थी. And second thing that they say to you is, हमारे culture में ये बातें होती
नहीं
नहीं.
होती.
Exactly.
So that's what the top taboo is all about.
You're going against the culture of the country if you're going to do this. So
लेकिन
what you're saying sounds ideal. I just don't know whether this is going to. I mean, this is the challenge that we are facing.
it's a challenge,
Kavita,
of
can
course
I
it's a
just,
challenge, but
yeah,
Kavita,
Kavita, yeah, Prabhat, I just wanted to add a point to what Kavita is saying, and then I would like both of you to comment on it. Kavita first. What, in fact, that's one of the questions as well. What about the role of pornography? I mean, on paper, of course, it's banned, and but in a way, that ends up as the vehicle with which a lot of children end up learning about sex, and that's can be quite harmful as well, because it's a very wrong notion of what sex is all about. Kavita, do you have a point of view on that?
No,
How
I
do
mean, it's not.
schools handle
so
that?
let me finish my point. I have just one more point to add, and then I'll
Okay,
go
sure,
back to
sure.
Kavita. I'll be very keen
Yeah,
to hear listening to Kavita
yeah,
on this particular topic because I also would like to
right.
know how
Yeah,
this impacts actually. So the second thing I'm talking about is sound knowledge. So sound
yeah,
knowledge has to be scientific knowledge, and who will impart
right,
that? So of course we cannot give it to the parents. It has to be the teacher. So teacher has to impart all this, and when they are imparting this knowledge, the chapter that they create in the textbook should not
right,
be only based on the physiology or the reproductive
right,
system. It should not end over there. It should actually also
right,
talks a little bit about the sexuality, how it grows in the children, and it also should address a book. If some teacher can take the initiative, I don't know, I'm not the expert in that. If some teacher can take the initiative and do a survey of the children and ask them what are your misconceptions about sex, what are the common talking points in the peer group, and they'll definitely give you information if you conduct this survey. And based on that, if you can actually write a book which is not the textbook on sexuality, but misconception about sexuality. If you write the book on misconception about sexuality and then give a
yeah,
scientific information about that, so this is some kind of initiative a teacher can take, and it's going to be wonderfully received. Third and the last point I would like to make here, and I'll go back to Kavita to understand what she has to say about the point that Kaveri has raised, is to develop the attitude.
yeah,
There is a need to develop the right attitude. The children are so vulnerable; they succumb to the forthright argument. If the peer is making a big argument or is a bully, the child is going to succumb to that. So what is that we need to do is to make this child not to stop listening to these things, because anyway they are going to listen to all these. Things are so obvious these days. You cannot be anywhere everywhere, and things are available on a small mobile, so they'll be exposed to that. But all we can do is to make them mentally very strong. So we need to make them understand that there is something called a stoic response to the situation, and it's a part of the overall well-being. Mindfulness, we can teach them mindfulness. We can also expose them a little bit about the mindfulness, and we can tell them that, okay, look, you have to differentiate between the things which are under your control, the things which are not under your control, and take the decision in the rightful way. So if you develop them as a right, if you give them the life skill of taking decisions in life, and how do they take decisions, and how they become mentally very strong decision maker, so that actually solves quite a lot of problems. So I have got three layers to talk about here. So one is, I have said, that is emotionally stability. We have to work on that. Second, we have to work on the sound knowledge to give to the children, and work on the book on misconception. and that's the call of the hour. And the third is to develop the attitude. So that's
Right.
these are the three layers I would like to
May,
talk
may
about.
I, yeah, may I bring you in, Kavita, on pornography? Big question. How do schools handle it?
Well, I mean, obviously they don't encourage it. They don't want it. They would love to ban it. I mean, those are obvious answers. I
But
think
it exists.
it exists, and I think it exists not because children look at pornography, but because everybody does.
Yeah.
Exactly the point. I mean, that's I think what Srijani is trying to say.
What
That,
Shrikani said, exactly.
and I guess what I mean, where do they find most of it is accessed on laptops that belong to adults at home, and
Yeah.
interesting part of it, which nobody's kind of looking at. I think the part that really we need to be careful about is the aspect that there may be a feeling that children think that's what it's all about. That's what sex is all about, and I think that I mean most people probably eventually discover, hopefully through their own experience, that it's not.
Exactly.
I think that's again like a part of growing up, which is what I think Srijani was pointing out to her friends, that I mean, why are you teasing this particular boy? It's really there across. I guess the misconceptions that Prabhat is talking about. Somebody has asked on the chat that how do you deal with the fact that there may be institutions that are religious institutions and they
Yeah.
don't want to have sex education in them. So obviously they would look for a person coming from the outside, right? So you have a lot of organizations that offer this to schools as a way of working, so that if you don't want to do it yourself specifically, you might want to bring in a resource person. However, I do find that you have to be extremely careful, because I find a lot of the resource organizations themselves have misconceptions.
Yeah.
And it's very problematic. So I remember a situation where when I was interviewing a group that came in themselves saying that they want to teach this in the school, I said, okay, what do you talk about? And they gave me the curriculum. So, and in that it said something about masturbation. And I said, so what is it that you teach about it? And this person looks at me and says, oh, don't worry. We say that it's a phase and you'll get over it.
Oh.
I mean, really? So, I mean, this is like, why are we saying children have misconceptions?
Yeah.
Adults have them, resource organizations have them, then there's a real issue. And I think the big question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of a society do we really want?
Yeah.
Do we want a society where children are able to talk about these things with their parents? Do we want a society where women have equal rights to men in terms of being able to say
Yeah.
yes and no for whether they should be approached? Forget about whether they should have sex. And I think that's where this is a big question for us. What kind of a society do we want? And then we will be able to move towards something where we can talk about everything that we can openly.
Absolutely. Harjeet, I wanted to ask you a related question, which has come in from chat. That it says we need to inculcate to middle-aged adults to behave in a humane fashion when they come across young girls and young boys, and not to look at them and exploit them. I think they mean when they're in a sexual relationship. How does one handle this? I know I've asked you this a little about this before, but this really is a big sticking point, isn't it?
Kaveri, you got to repeat the question.
The
I couldn't get a
question,
hand of it.
yeah, it's on chat as well. We need to inculcate to middle-aged and aged adults to behave in a humane fashion when they come across young girls and young boys, and not to look at them and exploit them.
Right. You see, again, it's the part of something that you called the sensitivity itself.
Right.
Right. Again, this is something which cannot be done, cannot be taught overnight. It is something which has to be imbibed. Uh, it is part of your mindset. It is part of your growing up. It is part of your personality. You would always see some adults talking in a very sane, very sophisticated manner. At the same time, a bunch of them talking in a very uncultured manner.
Right.
Right. Now, as Kavita was pointing out, it is not something that the culture has taught you. It is something that was part of your growing up.
Right.
Can we correct this situation? Again, as Rijani was pointing out, catch them young. for somebody catching them young, you can still correct the situation. For somebody who has already cemented into this human being who objectifies women or objectifies the very concept of sexuality, I think it's a little difficult for that person to be restored back to the kindness or the neutrality. Well, the law can always come to the rescue, but talking about imbibing morality, I think it's a little too late.
Yeah. I
If
think
I
that, yeah.
allow me to complete.
Yeah.
If the person asking the question was pointing out in terms of law, well, yes, the law is also not only in terms of physically harming somebody. The law also covers situation wherein you are causing a disturbance to a person by terms of in terms of cyberbullying, in terms of stalking. Take for example pornography.
Yeah.
Now, as Kavita was pointing it out, you see, everybody does that. Comes a question: is it wrong? Maybe there would be difference of opinion. Some might say no, it is not. Somebody would say it is merely an answer to curiosity. Somebody might say it is a little mystery which can be ignored, perhaps. But the problem lies if a person who's adult, if somebody who is has soundness of mind is putting it across to a child.
Yeah.
Watching pornography might not be an offense, but showing pornography is definitely an offense. So that is why when I said initially that child education or sex education is not restricted to children, it has to be widespread to adults. It has to be taught to the teachers and the parents. I may also quickly point out a term here, which is called the concept of mandatory reporting under POCSO.
Right.
Well, Kavita was pointing it out initially that a lot of parents would always resist.
Yeah.
If they hear a incident where their daughter was or their son was harassed by somebody, they would always, in the name of family honor or in the name of protecting the child or in their own name or whatever fancy argument they have, they would always want to not report the matter.
Right.
Well, this is for all our audience here. There is no choice. The law says that if a matter is not reported, it is still a punishable offense. If I know that a child has been harassed and I do not report the matter, there is a punishment for you, and the punishment can go as big as 6 months. You understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about a mere fine. I'm also talking about imprisonment to you if you do not report the matter. So I guess that I've answered the question. And one more thing I would like to point out here. I mean, as a judge, I've seen this happening in the courts as well. I'll quote an example very quickly. Once I was hearing a bail application, right? The matter was concerning stalking.
Right.
A boy chasing a girl and so on and so forth. We all understand what is stalking. I don't have to elaborate upon that. Now, while we were arguing this bail application, while the advocates were arguing the bail application, somebody came up with this argument that it was all consensual, and they tried to show me photographs of the boy and the girl in a close, let's say, intimate poses.
Right.
Now, my question is to all the young friends, all the young audience that we have here. Once again, I told you earlier also, below 18 years of age, there you are not adult, you are a child. A child has no consent whatsoever. So please step into my shoes for one quick minute and ask yourself and answer my question here. Does these photographs have any value as a judge if you are deciding this matter? Would you be swayed by these photographs?
Right.
Well, the answer has to be a resounding no.
Right.
The concept of consent does not exist. Right. So, Kavyangana has answered this question. The answer is no. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, I would not be swayed by these photographs. And this is something, a food for thought for all my young buddies out there. Do think about it.
Great. The last word to Kavita and Srijani, then we'll call it a day. Srijani, your point of view, finally, what do you think is possibly the right age and the right way that whether we call it self-awareness or sex education, what is the ideal way that you'd like to see it being inculcated?
So, personally, I would like to say that different age groups have to be taught in different ways and different things.
Right.
Right. Like till 5th a different curriculum, till 8th a different curriculum, then till 10th or till 12th. Some things I really want children to know because I feel like I have suffered because I didn't know. I think till 8th also you should teach kids about their rights,
Right.
right? Under POXO, under I think POXO sums it up, so that they know that this is what they can do, and especially the part which Harjeet sir just mentioned, that you have to report it,
Yeah.
right? So, and plus in schools, I feel like they have to have this. Some schools do have this anti sexual harassment cell or a group. You have to make them really vocal and I think really out there. Like, these are the people who will help you out, and this shouldn't be just a once a year thing. I genuinely feel that. Like Prabhat sir also mentioned, it's not about curriculum. It has to be more of a workshop, more interactive. I think
Right.
there's a lot of space for this being interactive, because I personally had a lot of questions. I still do, I feel like, but I don't know who to address them to. Right. And I genuinely feel CBSE should come up with a uniform curriculum. That's the problem. That different schools are teaching different things at different levels. There's no uniformity. Right. And there are quite a few things I would like to see, like, about menstruation. As I mentioned, I want to know the alternatives.
Right.
I want to know about the disorders, and I would have liked someone to tell me that it's okay to see a gynac, right?
Right.
If this happens, you should see a gynac. And this taboo that unmarried girls don't go to gynacs and everything. I think a lot of taboos, a lot of problems can be countered in our society by teaching kids at a very young age. For example, pornography, I'll mention it here. I personally, I don't think masturbation or watching pornography is problematic, but the content of pornography is, because firstly, a lot of it is forced. A lot of it is just women don't know they are being filmed.
Yeah.
So a lot of content there is like not right. And where also I think one thing I've noticed in guys is that the main problem I feel with pornography is there is no concept of consent in a lot of those videos,
Right.
right? And sex without consent is just sexual harassment and rape,
Right.
which I feel like a lot of guys don't get. I have heard this conversation so many times. Girls are just like, dude, जो तू porn में देख रहा है वो really नहीं होता है, and
Uh,
guys don't get it.
right.
This is not how it happens. That's the problem with pornography. It has no concept of consent,
Right.
right? And in sex ed, you should talk. If you talk openly about, uh, family planning and different contraception methods, maybe a lot of unwanted pregnancies might be saved. So I think there's a lot of scope here. I definitely want to take up on the peer learning thing, that there should be a group of students, preferably in 11th and 12th standard, who are seen as more approachable, who are seen
Right.
as kids or your peers or your seniors, who will take up things for you, who will try to be there for you, right? And take it up with teachers.
Right.
These, because you're putting a lot of responsibility on these students too, if you think about it,
Right.
right? So I think there, and plus teachers have to be trained, I
Right.
feel. And on these parent teachers meeting, I think, so a lot of times in our school on parent teacher meetings, different workshops are held. So why can't you hold it even for this, right? Where you have a very open conversation with parents, that what are your issues, and then the person, the counselor, or whoever is going to teach it should address these questions,
Right.
right? So that there's a teacher parent collaboration, right? And then on the other hand, there are students, responsible students. So yeah, I think that's how I would like to see
Great.
it.
Well done. Kavita, the last word goes to you because, as I said, every problem lands on your desk eventually. So, really, what's the ideal?
So I think the ideal is to, as a school, and like Srijani is saying, that you have to have a partnership with parents. You have to bring them in, and together with the teachers and the parents, you have to have a sense of what is it that you're going to do, what kind of a way in which you're going to approach the whole business of, um, uh, you know, uh, self awareness, gender awareness, sexuality, intimacy, growing up, pressures, peer pressures, all of that. I think it has to go into a space where parents are aware of what's being said in school.
Right.
Parents might want to come and say, how do we speak to our children? We used to have a lot of parents who would come and say, thank you so much for having done this in school, because now I find it easier to talk to my
Right.
child. Already being discussed. So that awareness between the parents and the teachers, the sense of closeness, that needs to be very strong. I think the school leader needs to be very clear that these are the things that are going to, this is the way in which we're going to approach all of, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's, boys being seen teased for homosexuality, which
Yes.
stigmatizes them.
Which is a big issue.
A big issue.
Yeah.
Or girls being called lesbians, or,
Yeah.
just the use of the word vagina and penis being so difficult. Eve Ensler,
Exactly.
thank God for her. And
Yeah. I mean, even for people of our age, just using the word vagina is still so difficult.
yeah. So I think just being able to understand this is the vocabulary that, how do you begin to use that vocabulary? How do children begin to understand when they're using, like Prabhat was saying, they're using language which use, or I think Harjeet was saying, they're using, words which actually are abusive for women. What do they actually mean? Where did they
Yeah.
come from? What was the origin? So really beginning to see everything as a teaching opportunity. I think that's what's really important. Not making, and it starts with small things like making sure that boys and girls can sit next to each other.
Right.
You wouldn't believe just how many schools there are where you feel like, there's some sort of a invisible line drawn in the middle of the classroom, and all the boys will sit on the right, all on the left. There's nobody who's allowed to sit next to each other. So those kinds of things, and the whole issue of projects being done together, work being done together,
Yes.
and building.
Absolutely.
Understand what are like, say, for example, menstruation. It was so well discussed in school that the boys would be really supportive if the girls said, I've got a stomach ache, or I'm not feeling good.
Right.
This sense that, okay, this is. But then on the other hand, we also had boys who would say, why is she in school? She's not supposed to be here because she's impure.
Yeah, exactly.
And that becomes a point where you say, okay, let's talk about what that means.
Right.
And how do we look at the historical, issue of what is this impurity, and why was it considered a time for a woman to sit aside, and not to treat it as something wrong, but to treat it as an opportunity for education.
Right.
You learn all the time. So I think that for me, that's what it is. But it's really, it takes a lot out of a school leader. It takes a lot out of a school to build that sense of confidence, comfort in the children and in the parents. But it's doable. So I think it's worth it. It
Right.
depends what sort of a society we want. That's
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the learnings that we had from our last session, Kavita, where we ended up saying that every teacher actually needs to be a counselor. You don't necessarily need to have a separate counselor.
Because
Every
asking a
teacher
lot
is.
from a teacher, by the way, Kaveri, because
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, like, you're almost treating teachers as if they are these perfect human beings.
Exactly. I agree.
Molded by some strange
Yeah.
at college or some molding agency. Brought them out to you, and you sort of look at them and say, oh, you're fantastic. You can talk about anything under the sun.
Right.
No, it takes time.
Right. I agree. Thank you so much. It was lovely listening to you, Kavita, Prabhat, Srijani, and of course, Harjeet. It was a wonderful conversation. And I think the one thing that we took away from here is perhaps we can start by changing the name itself. From sex education, if we start calling it self awareness, that in itself is going to be a big start and a complete redefining of the topic. Thank you very much, No Rape India. Thank you very much, Lawyers Club. And thank you to my panelists. It was a lovely conversation.